He voted for the big government program Obamacare. He voted for the big government program Cap and Trade. He voted for the big government program Dodd-Frank. And we talk about this wherever we go in the district about how this affects people, how it's crushing the economy. And Wall sits passively by as the EPA and transportation, and everybody rolls out these regulations. 2.5 regulations every hour of every working day, 3,000 new laws a year, coming down on business, consumers, driving up costs, squeezing people. That's what's going on, and I think you put it all together, that liberal record of his is worth about $1 million in free advertising, and you got to help me find the other $1 million for the rest of the race.
Thank you, Jim. Next, we'll start with Mike, then Jim, and Aaron. Okay, we've talked a lot about the economy. How do we get rolling again?
Well, the first thing that we need to do, of course, is to bend down all the regulations that Jim just talked about. Just in this first 2 years alone, there were 90 federal mandates that added trillions of dollars to business every year. So one of the things we've got to do in terms of limited government, which, by the way, I serve on the state government finance committee at the state level, and that's what I tried to do the last 3 years, is to work on state government because it does the same thing in terms of imposing regulations and mandates. But it's got to be about limiting government in terms of what they do to business. And that's how we get business going again. But it's got to be about our tax structure. We have to begin thinking about how we're going to incent people to begin to invest again. And Obamacare, we talk about that as it's going to be an impact and an issue for all the people across CD1. But when you think about it, Obamacare right now is doing what? It's driving small businesses to consider what they're going to do with the money that they have. Are they going to be able to afford health care? Are they going to be able to expand and add jobs? No. So it's got to be Obamacare, and it's got to be our tax system.
Thank you, Mike. Jim?
Like I said, I'm a limited government guy. I just believe that the less interference that we have from the federal and state and other governments with business and entrepreneurs, the better it will be. I mean, we've gotten to a point where the government is so intertwined in almost every decision. We have farmers here that can't put manure on their land unless they go get permission from some government agent. We have manufacturers that have to go talk to the EPA every time they want to expand here or do something just a little bit different. We have people in this room that deal with FDA issues and others. Just an impediment on business. Now, I would say this. Sometimes the Republican Party, and I believe, the only way we're going to fix this country is through the Republican Party, which is the conservative vehicle. But we haven't always done our job. A lot of times we've stood up and maybe been a little bit too much for big business. Small business is the backbone of this economy. Small business people are the ones that create the jobs, the ones that create the new technologies that move up to become bigger businesses. We have to stand for small business. I'm for broad-based tax reform, whether that's a consumption tax, a flat tax, and so forth. Deregulation, the Reagan JFK economic model. That's what I support.
I think you might hear a common theme here, but the best way to get the economy going is get the government out of the economy. I was talking to a business owner 2 weeks ago. I think it was. We travel so much, we can't keep it straight, but 2 weeks ago. And he has a business that has 65 employees, okay, a small business. And he has hired 6 people to do nothing but 10,000 hours worth of regulatory work every year for the government because of the paperwork that they're requiring him to turn in. 2 of the things that they ask for on an annual basis is they want his 3-year capital budget and his 5-year capital budget. And he said, because he works in the telecom business, he said, Aaron, the 3-year budget, he goes, I can kind of fill out and send it into him because I kind of know what I'm going to be buying in 3 years. But he says, the 5-year budget, what I'm going to be installing and selling in 5 years hasn't been invented yet. That's just one example of where the government has grown so large, it doesn't even know what the left hand is doing from the right hand. We need to get the government out of our economy.
Thank you, Aaron. The next question will start with Jim, then Mike, then Aaron. What is your plan for dealing with this stifling level of federal regulation? We talked about regulations. What's your plan for dealing with that?
I talked about that in my deal. When I announced for Congress about 3 months ago, I said that the second big plank that I'm working towards is fighting bureaucracy, attacking the bureaucracy, reforming government, and getting to quashing draconian regulation. And I had a debate with Mr. Benson in Waseca not too long ago. And I said that my idea, maybe it's radical, but I'll tell you what, I think that Congress needs to lead by example. Take back its regulatory authority from the EPA. The EPA is so mismanaged by the Obama administration, what they're doing to coal-fired power plants, what they're doing to farmers and others across the board. It's going to have a stifling effect on our economy. It's going to crush our competitiveness. It's going to drive up costs of energy. And let me tell you something. You drive up costs of energy, as it already has, drives up the cost of everything else, because every product and service in this country is tied to it. The Congress is the one that created the EPA. The Congress is the one that delegated regulatory authority to the EPA. And I believe in this case they should bring back that authority and issue the regulations themselves.
Thanks, Jim. Mike?
Thank you. I spent 3 years on state government finance, and one of the things that I did was to make sure that government was more efficient. So I have a lot of experience. One of the things that I'll do, of course, as we move to Congress and from the State House, is to make sure that I'm on the government reform, Darrell Iss's committee. That's where you can really make some hay in making sure that the government reform does really happen. You can pass bills, advocate for a reduction in the EPA, the Education Department, the Housing Department. We got to work on the Federal Reserve, but there's a lot of things that need to get done. The best thing to do, of course, is to continue to work closely with agencies to make sure that we move as much as possible from the federal to the state level. Folks, if there's anything that I found in my time in the State House, is that the closer that you can move it to where the services are provided, the more efficient it is, and the more daylight there is to the decisions that are being made. What's going on in Washington is there's just not enough people that are getting into what's going on in Washington to be observant enough to make sure that what goes on there stops and regulations are changed.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron?
Well, first of all, Congress needs to take the power back to regulate. They need to do their job. You know, and the other funny thing about the government slowdown, we didn't have a shutdown, we had a slowdown because 83% of the government or whatever it was still open, which is sad in its own right. But, you know, a good example is the EPA. They've got like 11,000 employees or something like that, and they had to furlough 10,000 of them. But the spokesman for the EPA said, don't worry, the 1,000 that we have that we've deemed essential will be able to continue everything that the EPA is doing. Well, so that means we've got 10,000 too many people. That's what it means to me. But, you know, as soon as we start the steps to actually reform government and shrink the size and scope of government, again, we're going to get the economy off and running on the right foot. I believe very strongly in allowing businesses to do what they do best. And that's to grow and create jobs, not with the government's help. Barack Obama infuriated me when he said you didn't build that statement. And that's exactly what Tim Walz believes as well.
Aaron, stay up there. The next question will start with Aaron, then Jim, then Mike. We talked about the national debt. What needs to be done about the national debt?
Well, first of all, we need to live within our means. We can't keep adding on to the debt. That's unsustainable. We're past the point where that's unsustainable. Secondly, if you really look at paying off $17 trillion, I mean, that number is so large, it's almost incomprehensible. But if we get the economy going again and start driving the economy and growth in the economy, that $17 trillion will shrink on its own. But number one, Congress has to live within its means. There needs to be a balanced budget amendment, and we need to balance that budget on a yearly basis, number one. Whether it's going back to the 2008 spending levels, going back to 2006 spending levels, whatever it is. It's kind of funny, we always talk about Social Security running out of money, but we never talk about the welfare program running out of money.
Good one. Jim?
Well, in 2006, Congressman Walz ran for Congress against Gil Gutnick, and he said that the Republicans were spending too much money, and they were increasing the national debt in ridiculous ways. And if that Democrat tracker is back there, I agree with what Congressman Walz said in 2006. Our party did spend too much money. We did increase the debt. We're not blameless in this. We've got blood on our hands too. But what's been happening under the Obama administration, the explosion of debt, puts our entire American way of life at risk. At some point, we go over the edge if we don't make structural changes. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But Congressman Walz is part of the problem. When he was elected in 2006, the national debt was right around $8.5 trillion. Now it's over $17 trillion. That spending didn't happen on its own. There was $1 trillion stimulus bill that he voted for, if I don't forget. And on it goes. So I think we take that issue to the people and say the congressman's part of the problem, we're going to be part of the solution, and we can talk about other issues later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Mike?
Actually, Congressman Walz has voted to thwart every effort Republicans have made to make a real difference in the projection of where we're headed in terms of our deficit and our budget. What needs to happen is that the people there need to finally stop playing politics and get about the business of the people of the United States. And look at the future and the kind of debt that we're going to accumulate and begin to realize that if we don't make changes now, it may be too late. With $17.2 trillion, and we're adding $1 trillion every year, we have to stop nibbling around the edges. The budget deal that just got passed is actually going to raise what the spending was supposed to be under the sequestration by $50 billion. That's not the way we're going to get to really addressing the deficits that we have. So we look at discretionary spending. You look at the latest book of all the things that the congressman or the senator came out with in terms of things that we shouldn't spend money on. That's just nibbling. We've got to begin addressing things like the entitlement programs. That is where we have a $17.2 trillion deficit, folks. We have a $40 trillion unfunded liability in Social Security.
Mike, stay up there for the next question. Next question will start with Mike, then Aaron, then Jim. I'm told I need to speak closer to the microphone here. So this is the question. What is the role of the federal government in education? What role should the federal government play in education?
Well, the first most succinct answer is less than we have right now. You know, the Federal Education Department was created in the 1860s. And you know, it was created to be a repository for all the great ideas that the states accumulated so that those ideas could be sent back out to the states and then they could use those best practices. Well, since that time, of course, that's morphed into the monster that we have now through many different ways to call it. You know, first it was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it's No Child Left Behind, and we have we got Common Core now going on. But the federal government needs to bug out because it's just like at the state again. You know, the best examples of school systems that are really doing a great job are when they're not directed by mandates from either the federal government or the state government. So what do we need to do in terms of the federal government? Well, we need to give that money back to the states. We have Title I. I know we're going to have Title I in terms of making sure that there's not disparate treatment in terms of the economies of scale and so on, but there's a lot we can do in turning back the federal government's responsibility to the states.
Thank you, Mike. Aaron.
Well, first of all, the money should never go to Washington and have Washington give it back. It needs to stay locally. That's the first thing. You know, when I was growing up in central Iowa, one of the most coveted positions that you could get elected to as a parent was the PTA. They were the moral conscience of the school board. They selected curriculum and they helped guide curriculum. That's not the federal government's responsibility. It's the parents within the school district, number one. Number two, the more we have control of the money locally, the more we have control. And by sending, whether it's your property taxes or that fund the school to the state and then it gets reallocated. You know, I live in Byron, and it's about $7,500 a student to educate over there in that district. It's one of the best school districts in the country. When you turn that money into St. Paul and Minneapolis, I think it's like $14,000 or $15,000 per student, and they've got about a 50%, $23,000. I've heard various different numbers on what that is, but they've got a very dismal record up there. And again, I reiterate, the more we can keep the decision-making at the local level, the better off we are.
Thank you. Jim.
As I said earlier, I'm for taking the broad powers of Washington and sending them back. And part of that means block granting monies. Now, I wasn't for No Child Left Behind. I call no bureaucrat left behind. But I wasn't for that program. Double the size of the Department of Education. I think it was a mistake. But we're not going to go from 0 to 100 overnight. We're not going to be able to shut that place down overnight. It'd be a nice goal down the road. What I think we need to do is block grant the monies back to the states. Encourage governors of like mind to put together school choice program so the money follows the student, not the student following the money. If we had school choice in education, it would be an explosion of competition overnight. People would have a myriad of opportunities to get their kids educated. Parents would be empowered. The only people that don't like that are big union members and the liberal politicians. And I can think of one guy that fits both of those categories.
Yeah, you can stay up there. We're going to go do a couple of yes/no questions. Okay? So why don't you just all stand now? So we don't pass the... So Aaron, then Jim, then Mike. Yes, no. Will you abide by the GOP endorsement?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right, this one will go with Jim, Mike, and Aaron. Yes, no. You support a balanced budget amendment?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, we're going to go into the second round of questions. They're going to be similar issues-related questions. You can sit down now. However, this time I've asked that the candidates answer as if they're in a debate with Mr. Walls. Okay? It's a little different take on this. So, first question here, we're going to start with Aaron, then Mike, then Jim. What is your position on Obamacare?
Mr. Walls, I think your position is pretty clear, so let me make mine clear. Obamacare needs to be repealed. You cannot be trusted, it cannot be fixed. You've not only voted for the original bill, but over 41 times you voted to continue to fund Obamacare. And then when you were starting to take a little bit of political pressure back in your district between the three of us, after it was already a foregone conclusion, you decided to side with the Republicans. You're not going to get away with that when I'm the endorsed candidate. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, and I'm going to point out every vote that you've taken on the failed system of Obamacare and the bills that have led to the increase of our debt over the last 6 years.
Thank you. Mike?
You've got to realize we've been at this for a while, so our answers are not going to vary all that much. But in the same vein, Congressman Walls, you voted 41 times when you had an opportunity to repeal Obamacare. And what we have now is a system that is penalizing millions of Americans. They're not able to keep their doctor, they're not able to keep their insurance, and you, just like our president, told everyone in the 1st Congressional District that they should be for Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, because those are the kinds of things that would happen, and the least of these in our community would have a better chance. Well, what in fact has happened is that for millions of Minnesotans in CD1, they've lost their health care. They don't know where they're going to get it in the next 12 months. They don't know who their insurance company is, and they certainly don't know who their doctor is. So Congressman Walls, the last vote that you took, it's like letting the horse is already out of the barn and you try to shut the door. That's what's happened with Obamacare. Now it's time to repeal Obamacare and get back to the business of free market principles.
Thank you, Mike. Jim?
It's like Clint Eastwood in the empty chair back here. Congressman, I know you know my position on Obamacare because I was just down in your Mankato office today doing a news conference. And I saw some of your staff, and what I told them is that your vote has hurt the people. You hurt the people that you represent. You went out there, instead of going to Washington and defending this country and defending the people you represent, Congressman, you went out there and made them vulnerable. You went out there and made the Mayo Clinic vulnerable to underpayment. You put all the jobs in Rochester and our way of life in Rochester at risk. You did that because you believe in a liberal ideology. You're part of that group out there where Nancy Pelosi puts the squeeze on you and says, you got to vote for the bill to find out what's in the bill. And Congressman, when you do these types of things, these big government programs, you're going to end up with rationing. You're going to end up with an explosion of debt. You're going to end up with people in Medicare and Medicaid. You're going to end up with less people insured. You're going to end up with government control over people's lives, and that's wrong.
Thank you, Jim. Stay up there. Next question, we'll start with Jim, then Aaron, then Mike. This is, how do you propose we bring federal spending under control and keep it there?
Wow. I don't usually get stumped, but that's a pretty good one. I think what happened the other day with the Ryan Murray budget situation was wrong. I put out a statement that day which, and I'm gonna talk about that, which Tim Walz came back and kind of mimicked. And what we're doing out there, I thought that was a political document. I didn't think that was right. But you know, Congressman, you voted for all this debt. Congressman Walz, since you've been there, it's gone from $8.5 trillion to $17 trillion. You don't really know how to say no when it comes to those big liberal programs. But when I put out a thing and said what we need to do is start going line by line through the Pentagon and show that we can reform that place without hurting military pay and benefits, without hurting our weapons system, what did you do? You just mimic me. You're following me. Who's the congressman here, Tim?
Thank you, Jim. Aaron.
Mr. Walz, shame on you. As a veteran and an individual that does nothing but claim in all of his press releases that you're for the veterans, the farmers, and the folks of southern Minnesota, the fact that you voted on the Ryan Murray bill is unconscionable. Because what it does is it reduces our veterans' retirement benefits by 1% every year. And I think without reducing the federal employees. How about that, huh? But you know, Mr. Congressman, I did bring Senator Coburn's list, and these are some of the things that you voted for. You know, during the government shutdown, there was more than 100,000, get this, 100,000 government employees that make over $100,000 a year. They got paid during the government slowdown. We had millions that were spent on the Obamacare website, about $400 million that you voted for. And then there's a $297 million Army blimp that they flew for 90 minutes, decided they didn't want it, and sold it back to the contractor that made it for $300,000. And I'll bring out one more here that I think this is absolutely a doozy. You also voted to fund NASA to search for signs of intelligent life in Congress. That was $3 million. I can tell you for 3 cents that there's not a lot of intelligent life in Washington.
Thank you, Aaron. Mike.
That will probably be the easiest question in a debate. He's got 7.5 years of votes that he's taken on all kinds of things that have increased the budget and the deficits that we have. We begin with TARP in the very early period of his tenure, and all the way up through Obamacare that has added billions, if not trillions, to eventual unfunded liabilities to what we're going to have as Americans. It is time to begin the serious work of really crafting a budget that will make sense for our nation and for the taxpayers of the United States and for businesses. It's time to begin looking at and making the hard choices about the things that need to be cut, the things that we really need. It's time to cut the things that we wish we had. It's time to put us in a budget just like the American families had to do since the recession started in 2008. One of the things that's not been talked about is, honestly, folks, the recession that we went through was avoidable. It was about Fed policy and congressional policy that led to allowing for financing of homes to people who could not afford them. Well, they're doing the same thing in Congress. Over 7.5 years, Congressman Walz has been giving us a budget that we can't afford.
Mike, stay up there. Next question. We'll start with Mike, then Jim, then Aaron. What is your stance on immigration reform? Your stance on immigration reform?
Congressman Walz, you know, you've been here 7.5 years. We've done a lot of talking, and we've done a little bit, a lot of nothing about addressing the issue that we have with a number of undocumented aliens in the United States. We're a nation of laws, and if we're going to remain a nation that's progressive in terms of making sure, and I don't say that in a liberal way, and making sure that that we can do the things that we need to do for the citizens of the United States, we need to make sure that the people that are here and receiving benefits are people that should be here and receiving benefits. For a nation of law, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that our borders are secured in a way that we can tell who's actually coming through the borders. And then we have to work on a system that allows for work permits so that we can have the kind of employment or the employees that we need. But we cannot allow for amnesty. We've got to make sure that we are protecting America first.
Thank you, Mike. Jim.
You know, when Congressman Walz ran in 2006, they actually ran ads, believe it or not, against Gutnick, saying that Gutnick was for amnesty for 45,000 people.